Dave Krieger back with you, and Fred Dashevsky. Good morning, sir. How are you? I know
morning,
you always say this is the fastest 30 minutes. We blow right through. It's like, wow. At least people are paying attention. That's what's important. If you don't know who Fred is, Fred runs U.S. Coin Capital, and he has a .com after that. And he has a toll-free number you can call. He is a numismatic gold investment professional. This is what he does. He's been at it for 40 years. He has, the influence, psychology, political science, economics. The guy's a brainiac when it comes to this. We have these discussions. No, credit where credit is due, Fred. I mean, come on. I mean, that's why you're one of our big sponsors here, and people need to take advantage of the fact that, you are dealing in gold and silver. And right now, that is key in surviving what could be potentially a future disaster in our economy.
Well, we certainly have an awful lot of problems. There are growing concerns around the world from more and more prevalent people that are beginning to express this real doubt about the ability of the federal government in the United States to perpetuate the way that we're currently operating, which is we stand now again at $34 trillion worth of debt. It's climbing at a more rapid pace than ever before. We talked about how much the government had to sell last year in treasuries in order to maintain itself, and it set a record by having to push out into the open market more debt than any country had ever sold in a single year. And now we're on a pace this year, 2024, to completely blow past that. The sizes and the sales of the bond auction since January 1st have been nothing short of record-setting and staggering. And I'm concerned, as are many, that the sustainability of being able to push out this much debt perpetually is going to become more and more problematic. And I look back at the last time that this went off the rails, because every once in a while, they just sort of seem to lose control. I look at this like we're building a ladder out of rickety chairs on top of one another, and we just keep building it higher and higher, but the foundation is not solid. And when it tips over, it gets incredibly ugly. And, even though it's only been a decade or so, 15 years, I think people have almost forgotten how bad it was the last time the whole thing fell over. So back in 2008, if we think about what the market crash looked like, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae had to be taken over by the United States government. We had the banking institution of Merrill Lynch that had to be sold to Bank of America. I mean, this was Merrill Lynch. This was a financial institution that had been around in the United States for 100 years. Lehman Brothers, which had been around for 150 years, went bankrupt. And Lehman Brothers, I mean, if you go back to Shearson Lehman, these were the big investment banks in the 1980s. They were a huge player in the economy. They were wiped out completely in 2008. And then the Fed had to bail out, of course, American International Group, AIG, and Washington Mutual was sold to JP Morgan. And then the Treasury Secretary had to come before Congress and beg for an immediate cash infusion of $700 billion. By Monday, it was basically, look, give us this money or the entire U.S. economy is done. We're going to default. The whole thing falls apart. Okay, so we came through that in 2008. Where we are now is we have piled up so much more debt and obligation that the next time this thing tips over, I just wonder whether or not there's any kind of structure left to ever support it. So if we're teeter-tottering on a point of, potential problems like this, it seems to me self-evident that people should diversify their wealth to have some sort of minimal protection. And this is why, and I know you've talked about this, but this is why I have this soulful belief, this deep-hearted sense of reality in dealing with physical gold and silver, because it's real money. It's not based on faith. It's not based on a government's valuation. It's not based upon people arguing and deciding whether or not they think it has value. It has intrinsic value and has for thousands of years. And if there's ever been a time in American history where people should be looking to have some wealth protection, it certainly is now.
And see, I'm looking at Government National Mortgage Association Guaranteed REMIC Pass-Through Securities Ginnie Mae REMIC Trust 2017-122, $235,222,118 is what it's valued at. And this is a base offering circular dated March 1st. I pulled this out of my files. I've got stuff on Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie. They're holding 60% of all the securitized portfolios in the country right now. And it says right there on the front page, Ginnie Mae will guarantee the timely payment of principal and interest on the securities. Ginnie Mae guarantee is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America. It says it right on the, and if you're paying the payments every month, how then can anybody be in default on a loan if the United States government is guaranteeing it? I mean, isn't this where the real problem lies? Is we've got, what, a quadrillion worth of these securities out there, and this is what everybody is betting on?
So it's become a security. Effectively, it's become no different than a treasury obligation. And again, if the government becomes the backstop, it's really problematic. What you want is a true capitalist economy, an unencumbered capitalist economy, a laissez-faire type where the government's hands are removed from interference so that the free markets control what's happening. If the real estate market is crappy, well, then prices should go down. There shouldn't be an artificial stimulus supporting it. If the stock market is not performing, valuations should go down. We shouldn't be providing free money at zero interest so that corporations can prop up stocks to artificially raise values. The more we deal in non-reality, the more we subject ourselves to potential problems for these things unwinding. So it's kind of like, again, building a house on a solid foundation or building a house on paper. You know, if you're going to build it on crap and there's nothing fundamentally supporting the weight, eventually you may run into a problem. And I don't want to be the guy that figures this out a day after the whole thing, you know, just implodes. And there's a lot of ways that this can go off the rails. And the more games that we play and the more parts of the economy that are controlled by artificial entities supporting value, the more that we're not dealing in reality and the more the opportunities are for problems to exhibit themselves. And it's the public that gets screwed because, you know, like you said, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, they'll stand behind the government obligations. The banks won't lose any money. They'll all get bailed out. You know, think about all the bailouts that occurred in 2008. None of those guys lost any money. None of those guys went to jail. None of them experienced any problems, except perhaps Lehman. Okay, we'll give it to them. They got screwed, but they were the sacrificial lamb. You know, somebody had to take it on the chin. The public wouldn't have accepted a $700 billion bailout without hanging somebody. So Lehman took it on the chin. But who's it going to be next time? You know, who's it going to be this round?
But we're all risking our money in the markets and betting on these treasuries. And the thing is we, the people, are suffering for it. And I could tell just by the way you talked in the last few sentences you just said, you're a big fan of John Locke.
Yep.
I'm holding in my hand a book that was printed in 1912, and it says it right there, 1912, Chicago, from the Open Court Publishing Company. This is a book called Locke's Essays of Human Understanding. So, you know, see, this is the thing. We're all big fans of John Locke, I can tell.
Sure. Well, think about how important this was back in 1912. Okay, we didn't have media like we have now. Obviously, there was no social media. None of these things existed. It was all controlled by books and newspapers. Now, back in 1912, when the election came up, Kuhn Loeb, which was the marketing agent and the investment banking firm that belonged to Paul Warburg, who was the author of the Federal Reserve Act, Kuhn Loeb actually financed all three of the presidential candidates in 1912, William Howard Taft, Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson were all financed by Kuhn Loeb. So they didn't care who won. They had it locked any way they had it. And they used the newspapers that they owned to send out a signal to America after the 1907 money panic that they needed to do something. And one of these guys was going to be your savior. So the public was bombarded with newspaper articles which were owned and controlled by the bankers trying to support the future presidential candidates that would give them, the bankers, what they wanted, which was control over the monetary system in America. This is eventually what led Woodrow Wilson to sign on to the Federal Reserve Act in 1912, which became law in January of 1913. And this is how we ended up with the Federal Reserve banking system, is because In the 1912 election era, it was all media controlled by who owned the newspapers. So now here we are in a modern era. I mean, we are, think about technologically, we're worlds away. I mean, we're like a planet away from where we were in 1912. The sophistication of what occurs now, so much more complicated. Can an average person discern an AI comment as not being authentic? I mean, can we make that distinction anymore? And how much of this crap are we going to see in the next 9 months between now and the election? It's going to be really interesting to watch the evolution of what we're going to have to deal with in the next 9 months.
And now we got into a little tete-a-tete this morning on the air about Nicole Shanahan being named. And I look at this and I look at the financial stability of America right now and where we're headed, and the fact that there is so much arguendo. And I'm just like, look, I'm taking a wait and see attitude on this. But, regarding the elections, the upcoming elections, we're facing a possibility for the 12th Amendment with RFK Jr. in there, because people will vote for the lesser of two evils and they don't want Biden. So they vote for him. The thing is our whole economy right now is in a complete state of disarray. People need to be thinking about investing in gold and silver coin. We've got the possibility of World War III, electromagnetic pulse. We've got warmongers in Congress right now that basically are self-serving and don't care. I mean, it's become very apparent. And I mean, it's like, what's a mother to do? Not serve your family total. It's like, look, you need to start investing in gold and silver and start getting your own financial house in order, because like all these securities out there that are into the quadrillions, you get an EMP attack and this government is on a level playing field with the rest of us. They're not going to help you.
No, and it's going to be extremely difficult if there's anything like that, because so much of what we're doing right now is in that electronic world. So, I know personally I would have a lot of trouble, except I do own a lot of gold and silver coins. So perhaps I'm better positioned to negotiate if things really go that far off the rails. But otherwise, I face the same problem. If my phone's down, or my computer doesn't have electricity to run, well, I can't access my checking accounts or my savings accounts or stock account or anything that I have that's electronic that I look at every day. I can't get there. So can I do anything with it? Can I physically still go to my bank and withdraw money? What's it going to look like if that stuff goes off the rails? So I really like the idea of the physical ownership of actual real money in the possession of the investor. I just think it's less reliant on other entities. And I don't trust the other entities enough to say, I'm going to be comfortable with everything I've done in my life and put it in your hands, Mr. Government, and allow you to control the value of the money that I'm going to try to use later on in my life. I've been watching the value of money erode since I was a kid, and it is getting perpetually worse. Expenses and costs are climbing at a much faster pace than wages, and I don't see any way that that's going to stop. And if we keep encouraging this by perpetually putting people into power who don't understand the fundamental flaw with the government running up deficits and not controlling its spending, we are all going to experience a lot of problems going forward that people can prepare for now with a little bit of diversification. So I am a huge fan for those that don't own physical wealth, that everybody should have a little bit of silver or gold in their possession, just as mere simple wealth protection.
Well, see, and that's the other thing that I was going to ask you as a follow-up. I don't even know if I've asked you this before, Fred, because we go into quantity, because people are calling me and they're asking me, look, I really want to call Fred. I really want to buy some gold and silver. And like, what do we do and how much do we own? And I said, look, there's a big difference between face value and the cost of acquiring face value. And now the average person per family member recommended, how much should you have for each person in your family face value?
Well, that's a great question. It's a good way to look at it. I've always looked at this in percentages. I think if you have 15 or 20% of your total net worth in the physical world, you're going to be far better off than if you have anything less than that. I look at that as the absolute minimum. And generally speaking, if you want to look at it in terms of face value quantities, a bag of junk silver, as they call it, or a bag of pre-64 coins is $1,000 in face value. It's about $22,000 or $23,000 in value. and the amount of silver that's in it. But a full bag per family member seems to be a great standard that has held up very, very well over the decades as a, well, just sort of a base case, as a kind of a plan for people to work at. And that's something that people can accumulate in one shot or over a period of time. I know a lot of people accumulate a little silver here and there whenever they have a couple extra bucks. I've watched people do this for 15, 20, 25 years and never spent more than a few $100s at a time and ended up with a great stockpile of cash. Now, we do have a minimum $1,000 order for our company, but there are ways for people to accumulate any quantity of silver or gold over time. And I think it's prudent to do that. And for most people that I talk to, it does provide them with a sense of wellness. Kind of a foundation that they feel comfortable with, knowing at least they have this physical stuff. I'm also curious about what your listening audience has been thinking about. I mean, Kennedy is an interesting dynamic to come into the campaign, because other than that, and again, I've been wrong about the last couple elections, so don't take me at face value, but I thought for sure that Hillary, was going to be our president. And, I've been wrong a couple of times, but it seems to me that people want Trump. In other words, the people that are voting for Trump, they want him as president. I think what I'm getting, and I could be wrong, what do you think from your listening on this? I think the people that are voting for Biden, it's not that they want Biden. They just don't want Trump. So I think the Biden vote is sort of a defense vote. It's not that they're saying, hey, this is our guy. We believe in this guy, and we think this is the man to run our country. I think they're voting for him because they just hate Trump. Whereas I think the Trump voters are saying, we want him to be our president. What's your sense from your audience?
Well, we're kind of a mixed bag here, but there's a lot of people that would vote for Trump again, just purely because of the fact that he's not per se a politician. He is, and folks, if you want to chime in, the phone lines are open at 844-769-2944, and you can let Fred know personally how you feel about it. But I'm speaking for the majority of the calls we've taken. If I had to take a poll, a majority of the people are going to vote for Trump because they like the way he ran the country as a CEO and not one of these 40-year politicians that hasn't gotten anything done except scream and yell at people and go, come on, man. And so, they're voting for stupidity. And it's like, look, they all know, everybody that is voting for Trump knows that Obama is probably running the Biden administration. And if he gets elected again, it's going to be another 4 years of Obama. I mean, that's what everybody on this channel thinks. And so, they're voting for Trump. And then you've got some people that say, I'll never vote for Trump, but I'll vote for someone in the alternative, like my vote doesn't matter. And I'm just going to stay home and not vote.
And that's the worst.
That's good. Yeah, it's going to hurt the campaign. So The thing is, when it comes to election cycles and it comes to the face value of how we look at ourselves and our own, I mean, we're really now, are we in a position that we have to stop depending on government for things and start depending on ourselves? Because
Absolutely.
Right now, anybody that's invested in Bitcoin, I really feel sorry for you, because it's as much ether as turning a switch and there goes the electricity. You have no access to your Bitcoin either. And neither does the government. They don't have access to any of it. I mean, The counties are not going to have access to your tax records. They're not going to be able to come up and say, okay, you owe us this, and if you don't pay it, we're going to foreclose on your house for non-payment of taxes. I mean, how's it going to work when there's no juice?
Everybody's going to be facing the same problem. So I do really believe fundamentally in that personal responsibility. I think that is essential. The concept of America from our foundation was sovereignty. The idea that, a sovereign king had the benefit of not having to answer to anybody. He didn't have a Congress that he needed to respond to, or a Senate. He didn't care what other politicians thought. He was sovereign king, could make his own decisions, and people had to accept it. Regardless of whether he was a smart king or a dumb king, you were liable for the results of whatever the king thought. That concept of sovereignty flowed through to America, and the founding fathers believed that we each individually should feel that same sense of independence, that we're not obligated to a government. The government is here to help us and work for us, be of the people, for the people. That was the idea, not to be something that we're relying on it like a parent to take care of us. So I do believe individual Americans need to accept that responsibility. And that's part of the reason I've been a big proponent of owning gold and silver coins, because I don't think I would want to be in a position where I'm relying on the government and trusting them to manage my future money. because they've proven to me in my lifetime they're doing a crappy job at it. Why would I continue to hire a carpenter who can't build a straight line? You know, you're going to fire the guy and put somebody else in power who has a better sense of what his job is. The Federal Reserve's job was supposed to be supporting the value of the dollar and maintaining some level of employment. But since the Federal Reserve took over in 1913, the value of the U.S. dollar has lost 96 or 97% of its value. They're not doing a good job. So if they're going to perpetuate this horrible, horrible job, why would we continue to want them to be in that position? So I'm going to step back and say, okay, I have two choices. Somehow get them out, which, you know, people have tried. Ron Paul has tried that for his entire lifetime. He can barely get Congress to agree to even audit the Fed, let alone end the Fed. We can't nationalize it, although that would be the smart thing. Simply put the Federal Reserve under the United States Treasury's auspices, and then we get control again because we can vote people out of Congress and out of government. You can't vote people out of the Federal Reserve Bank. And then I would come back to the idea that individual Americans ought to wake up and say, I can't count on anybody else but me. I therefore need to take my own personal responsibility for my own actions and protect my own wealth. And that is why I believe people need to own gold and silver coins. And if people would like to talk about this and how much to have, 800-878-2646 is our local phone numbers. Those are national. I'm sorry. Anybody can call from anywhere in the U.S. And again, we'll help people understand how to do it and why to do it, but most importantly, how to do it properly.
Right. One of our callers wanted to know how much U.S. dollars you think that a person should have on hand. And I'm like, I don't know. What are they worth? I mean,
well, you need short-term money. You know, you need to pay your bills. So that's why it's a percentage. Don't put all your wealth in anything, including gold or silver coins.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Sorry, Tim in Michigan, we did not have time to take your call. We're out of time. But like Fred said, man, this 30 minutes just goes by so fast.
If they want to email us, fred@uscoincapital.com. I'll be happy to answer as many questions as we can get to.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Fred. You're always a delight to have on and educational as ever. One of my diehard lock buddies out there. We appreciate that. Thank you. And now I know, see, you love history, and we don't want to see history repeat itself, folks, but I have a feeling we're headed in that direction. Anyway, we will be back tomorrow with our Thursday edition here at the Power Hour. In the meantime, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.